I was trying to think back, Shaun, to the time that you and I first connected. And I think it was when you entered Airbnb and I sent you an email out of the blue. I can't even remember what it was about, but do you remember the video that I sent for your executives? You remember when my mother interrupted me?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I do now. Yeah, but it actually, our story started way before then. Like you were kind of like I had come out of Jetsetter and done a lot of time in kind of the hotel accommodation space, the more traditional hotels and resorts. I hadn't done as much work in the vacation rental space yet. This was earlier in my career, like pre Airbnb. And so then I joined Airbnb and started to network in this kind of new supply category to make sure I knew the players. And I'm not blowing smoke. Like your name just kept coming up. Like it was, have you talked to Matt Orlando? Have you talked to Matt Orlando? No, I almost got frustrated. I was like, is this guy the Oracle? Like, why do I have to go kiss the ring?
Does this person even exist?
Yeah, but it was definitely like you're not going to get anywhere in this space until you've met Matt and like got the Pope's blessing that you are one of us. And that I'm not that was the experience. And so I remember sheepishly emailing you to be like, I need your guidance and your blessing to be a member of the VR space.
That is officially going to be our cold open for this podcast because everybody must hear that. How do you feel about doing an interview, Mr. Stewart?
I am fine with doing an interview. I'm happy to do anything that helps this space. Let's do it.
Hey, Unlock listeners. This episode's brought to you by Point Central, the leader in business-grade smart property solutions designed for rental properties. Point Central's technology helps you increase property safety, reduce operational costs, and improve guest satisfaction. Head over to pointcentral.com/VRMB to learn more. And Rental Guardian. With over 1 million property owners, thousands of property managers, hundreds of software partners and counting, Rental Guardian is arguably the most complete and trusted travel and damage protection platform in the industry. You can learn more at rentalguardian.com. And Breezeway. Breezeway's operations platform makes it easy to ensure quality, safety, and cleanliness across your properties so you can deliver an amazing guest experience every time. Head over to breezeway.io to learn more. Hola, ¿qué tal, compañeros? ¿Cómo están?
Hola.
Hello.
That was a little bit of Spanish for you. I'm not sure you understood it or not. I'm sharing some Spanish because I'm in Miami.
Congratulations.
Wow, you finally made it, huh? New digs, new life.
Thank you very much. I drove here in 2 days with a stopover in Tallahassee. I don't know why I said it that way because Tallahassee is not Talladega, but I had some nice Indian food there in Tallahassee and arrived in Miami last night. I'm officially a Miami resident, South Beach.
Woo! Welcome to Miami. Bienvenido a Miami.
Yes. I wish you could see me dancing right now, Tammy. You'd be proud of me.
I am always proud of you, Matt.
Thank you. How are you guys?
Good. Enjoying some rainy days, which are kind of my favorites during this season. Everything is green. It's beautiful. It feels calm. It's relaxing.
This is the first thing that struck me about moving back to a truly tropical place is the green and the humidity and the water. I feel like I'm kind of back in Panama a bit.
I'm glad.
Yeah, pretty exciting feeling. If any of our listeners are passing through Miami, you now have a friend here. And speaking of friends, today's podcast interview is a pretty spectacular one. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Stewart?
Hey, I'm for anybody that's named Mr. Stewart, so has to be one of my favorite podcasts of all time.
It is a very good name. Shaun Stewart is quite a visionary. He's somebody who has achieved so much in so little time in this corporate world of travel and tech. And it was kind of funny in trying to get him down for the interview. We had to postpone it because he had quite An impressive excuse, huh?
Yeah, he was converting his lab into like working on creating ventilators at the start of the pandemic, something like that, right? He mentioned in the New York Times he was working 24/7. So we said, okay, don't worry about the podcast for a little while. And then we finally got him a couple of weeks ago, which is wonderful.
Never before have I felt like I'm doing such a puny thing with this little podcast in having to postpone because he's actually creating ventilators and saving lives. He also has this wonderful perspective on just personal and professional development. Tammy, do you have anything to take away from Shaun's perspective?
Yeah, for me, it's super relatable the way he talks about recruiters. I always think that you can learn about a lot about a person by the way they treat strangers. And I think it's great advice. Even if you're not interested in a job, be nice to recruiters, get those calls, respond to those emails, attend those interviews. Might not be the right thing for you at the moment, but in the future, it will be useful. And developing a skill set. This is something that I've always believed in. I like doing so many things, so many different industries that I focus a lot on figuring out what I'm really good at and applying my strengths to different fields. And it has given me a very interesting and fun life. So yeah, I think it's great to hear other person articulate it in a very similar way to what I feel.
Well said. And Shaun is like one of the few CEOs that I know that really, and when I say CEOs in the broader tech space, that really understands vacation rental professionals and loves vacation rental professionals, thinks that we are the new class of entrepreneurs. So with that said, should we just roll? Shaun Stewart's the CEO of Newlab in Brooklyn, New York. But it's Shaun's last 20 years of professional moves, from Expedia to Jetsetter to Airbnb to Google X, that's as impressive as it is diverse. Today, we're going to talk about the patterns that are accelerating as a result of the pandemic. We're going to talk about vacation rentals as a frontier technology. And we're going to talk about the purpose of work and small business and life. Shaun, welcome.
Good to hear from you, Matt. It's actually nice to be able to take a moment out of the day and catch up with an old friend, and have a break from Zoom calls. So I appreciate it.
And this is a strange era that we are living in. So I'd like the listeners to hear, what is a current day in your life like besides being the father to an increasingly famous son on Instagram?
My life actually hasn't dramatically changed, other than where I kind of execute all the work on a daily basis. So I still get up at 6 a.m. and still get a 2-year-old out of bed at 7, who immediately demands his mother and not me. And I try to emotionally deal with that each morning. And by 8 o'clock, he's been fed and handed over to my amazing wife. And then I get on emails and I get on calls. My 8 a.m.s, I guess the biggest difference is I start now every morning at 8 a.m. with the two founders of Newlab, who are essentially my board. And what used to be a weekly check-in is now an 8 a.m. daily check-in, just because of the speed and pace of developments. Like, we literally have to get on a call and say, so what's happened in the last 24 hours? And do we have to alter our course as a result of it? And I think that mirrors what a lot of business leaders and operators are going through right now. It's just, you wake up in the morning to refresh your news, to figure out what has really altered your future in the last 24 hours.
And pre-professional career for you, you graduated and then 9/11 happened. Was navigating that dark time, does it remind you at all of what we're going through now?
It has been helpful, actually. Like, it provides perspective on what may be similar and what we might see from this moving forward in the travel industry. But it's also been incredibly valuable just to kind of conclude and acknowledge how different this one is. That the impact this is having globally on the travel industry and all of our lives can certainly have, lessons that can be brought forward from 9/11 that can help to strategize what the future looks like. But there are a range of elements to this that are unique to COVID-19, and like nothing, at least my 20 years in the travel industry, have experienced.
And I kind of skimmed through some of your background in the introduction there, but I was thinking it'd be neat just for listeners to hear maybe a sentence or two about each of your professional chapters. So I was thinking we could start with Travelscape/Expedia. What was your role there before we move on to Jetsetter?
Yeah, for sure. So I was a December graduate and from Cornell at the hotel school there, and so I was focused on the travel industry. I grew up carrying suitcases in a Hilton hotel and working in restaurants and things like that. So I was dedicated to being in the hospitality industry, and luckily got into a good school to study it. And I had 4 or 5 job offers. I wasn't the most amazing student, but I did well enough to have a couple of interested parties, and they all got rescinded after 9/11. Between September 11th and December 31st, when I was graduating, I suddenly lost all of the job opportunities that I was relying on. And the one that didn't disappear was Travelscape, and it was based in Las Vegas. It had just been acquired by USA Networks and was becoming part of Barry Diller's like IAC empire and part of the Expedia family. And so I packed up and moved to Vegas, and I was a market manager, which was essentially the conduit between the Expedia platform and the hotels. So I worked with hotels throughout the Mid-Atlantic was the region I got assigned, DC and Baltimore. And I had to figure out how to.
Oh, I didn't know you were in Baltimore.
Yeah, I was based in Vegas, but managing those two markets. And I was just responsible for making sure that anyone who searched on Expedia for those two destinations found the best supply, good pricing, good content, good offerings across all different star levels. And so that was my introduction to this balance between supply and demand, the distribution channels versus the suppliers, and that incredibly unique and tense relationship where both of them need and benefit from each other, but on a daily basis kind of log heads over a couple different issues.
I definitely want to get into the special balance there of having two clients, so to say. But Jetsetter and then into TripAdvisor, a sentence or two of what you did there?
Yeah, and so I was at Expedia for 9 years, luckily enough to move around as they launched new points of sale. I got to spend time in London and then Hong Kong and Beijing and then to Sydney and then back to New York. And then I realized I was kind of on a path to be an expert in one thing, which is I was getting pretty good at understanding the supply landscape in the hotel world and how you acquired and maintained quality supply for any distribution channel. But I didn't know much else. I'd never met an engineer. I'd never worked on a product. I wasn't good in finance. I hadn't managed a P&L, hadn't done anything in marketing or brand. And so I started to think, do you keep on this track? Do you become an expert and continue to grow in one field and grow up through the Expedia organization and probably relocate to Bellevue? Or do you try to expand kind of the scope of what you can do and the skill sets you've developed? And so I got introduced to Drew Patterson, who was at the Gilt Group building what at the time was introduced to me as Gilt Travel and later became Jetsetter. And I essentially traded in my kind of chip stack. Like I built up this currency of knowledge around how you acquire and distribute supply and negotiating with suppliers and working with hotels. And I traded that with Drew for the ability to join an 8 or 10 person startup and for him to allow me to get exposed to all these other things, to help with product, help with engineering, to be exposed to marketing decisions, understand and manage a P&L with Drew. And it was career altering. And so it was a 4-year period. I joined with a very ambiguous like VP of Ops title that kind of covered all matter of sins. And I helped build the retail model, the Jetsetter Homes platform for luxury homes. And eventually for the last year was the CEO there until we were acquired by TripAdvisor and became part of that Smarter Travel family.
The name Drew Patterson, I keep hearing that name coming up over and over again over the years, but I've never met him. I've got to meet this Drew Patterson. He's keeps popping up everywhere. Next was Airbnb, right?
You do. I mean, he has that same. So they say most people change kind of industries 2 to 3 times in their career, which certainly, like, I'm in my second kind of pivot, I guess. The difference with Drew is he hasn't. He's stayed focused on the travel industry throughout, with time at Starwood, with Kayak, with Jetsetter, with Checkmate, with Room 77, with Properly. And so the result is that his expertise, like I feel like I can talk eloquently to the travel industry after 20 years. So you can imagine what Drew, his experience looks like with an additional decade on top of that or two. Yeah.
Next in your journey was Airbnb, and I actually want to put that on the side for a moment because that's what our listeners are going to be most interested in. But the next step after that was Google X and then Waymo. You were in charge of self-driving cars, naturally, as a next step.
Yeah, this was my punked phase, as my wife calls it, which is I got a call from a recruiter who said, "We'd love you to come to Google X to talk about a potential job." And it was actually it was a very valid career tip. Was that someone early on in my career had said, "Be very nice to recruiters when they call you for a job, whether it's something you're interested in or not. Like, give them the time, explore the job, maybe even interview if you're not interested in it, because that relationship you build up, and the more you impress them, the more likely they are in the future to call you about jobs that may be interesting."
Mm-hmm.
And the more you grow in your career, the more these third party recruiters become the key source of securing talent, right? Companies that hire VPs and CEOs and those type of level positions, they often don't use in-house recruiting.
Right.
They use third parties to do something in a more kind of confidential and quiet manner. And so I'd been approached by a recruiter from True, Amy Vernetti, who's an amazing leader in the recruiting space and talent space and technology space. And she had approached me about a job that turned out not to be the right fit for me, and I didn't move forward with it. But I interviewed anyway, and I put my best foot forward. A year and a half later, she had moved to Google X and had been tasked with finding someone to come lead partnerships, strategy, business development, and operations for what at the time was called Project Chauffeur, which was Google's project that launched in 1999 to develop and deploy self-driving cars. And so she called me and said, "Hear me out. I've got this thing that I want you to come talk about." I had to sign a pretty scary NDA. And when I got home and told my wife that I was going to Google X to talk about self-driving cars, she asked if someone was punking me, if it was just a joke that was going to end up on TV,
Prank phone call.
which definitely seemed possible. And it was just an incredibly pleasant acknowledgement that at that point in my career, after 15 years or so, I had built a skill set and not necessarily an industry expertise. And that skill set had started to be appealing to various different industries or formats, if that makes sense.
It does.
And that was a big deal to me and a big deal to my career. And that conclusion and that opportunity changed everything for me, for sure. And I'm still very thankful for Amy and John Krafchick for even considering me for a position that I was slightly questionable about why I was there.
So that kind of brings us up to your current position. And Newlab, we had to originally postpone this interview because you guys were making ventilators for the pandemic, which is by far the most amazing reason to postpone a podcast. I see Newlab in the news. You know, Newlab is a hub of innovation. There's companies there that are making furniture from mushrooms, driving bicycles with bumblebees. No, I just made that last one up. But explain to others what Newlab is in general, just to get their head around it.
Yeah, and it actually it did have a more logical path than the kind of Airbnb to Google X path, which Google X had more than 35 different moonshot projects, as they call them, storing energy in salt, Google Glasses for kind of applications on factory floors. They had self-driving cars. They had Google Brain, like incredible steps forward in AI and machine learning. They had all these amazing teams working on incredible things, and on a daily basis, I regretted that I just didn't have time to deal with any of them or to learn about any of them or go to their presentations. It was like looking back at academia where you're like, wow, I studied one thing for 4 years in a campus of learning where I could have like stumbled into classes on ballet and Renaissance art, but I didn't. I just studied the hotel industry. And so I came to a point where I thought, is there a way I could get into something similar to this, but just be exposed to more than just one technology and one product? And recruiters come back into it. I had a friend at Diversa who I've worked with the folks at Diversa for most of my career from a recruiting perspective. And I called her and I said, listen, I don't know what I'm going to do next, but this is what would be kind of interesting to me. And can you keep that on your radar? And if something pops up, let me know. And she called me one day and said, I think you need to come see this thing in Brooklyn. And I got on a plane and she brought me to an 85,000 square foot building in the Brooklyn Navy Yard with 90-foot ceilings that was opened in 1908 and used by the Navy throughout both World War I and World War II for manufacturing and deploying the battleships that the Navy used in their arsenal. The USS Missouri, the USS Arizona, they came out of this Brooklyn building in the Navy Yard that had been empty and to be candid, a little bit kind of run down over the past 50 years as the land had gone back and forth from city, from federal level kind of Navy management back to the city. And the founders of Newlab were approached by Mayor Bloomberg with a pretty simple question, which is, if we gave you a 50 or 60 year lease on this 85,000 square foot building, what would you do with it? Like, what would you do that would be positive for New York? And Scott and David at the time, I kind of used the bad analogy of, it was like single people, which is, I know a lot of single people in New York, and every time I grab a drink with them or they come over for dinner, they inevitably tell me that there's no single people in New York. And you then have to realize that they're all over the place. It's just connecting them, that the center of gravity is the difficulty, the network to bring them together is the difficulty. And David and Scott had that same view around technologists and entrepreneurs building companies in advanced tech or frontier tech or the bleeding edge, whatever you're comfortable from a vernacular perspective, but that they all existed in New York, but just had no center, no connective tissue, no place to convene, no access to the labs and the prototyping equipment they need, no community to share ideas with and support each other. And so they went back to the Bloomberg administration and said, if we win this RFP, that's what we'll do. And so they did it. You fast forward 3 years later, they spent $65 million. They raised $6 million in a Series A, with another 59 coming from non-dilutive sources, which is a feat of pure magic in itself. And they opened an 85,000 square foot building at the time with 100 entrepreneurs and technologists building about 30 companies. And today there's close to 900 people that work out of this building. There's $8 or $9 million worth of prototyping equipment for those working in hardware. 40% of the companies are software only. And only 9% of the companies that have applied to be part of this community have been accepted. And throughout that 3-year period, you had north of $400 million worth of acquisitions, average valuations going through the roof per company. And you had proof point after proof point that having all of these people in a room together kind of raised all boats, or if whatever the right kind of metaphor is, that they all helped each other. The companies that were successful had AI from one company and a hardware design from another, and they had gotten fluid dynamics guidance from another person in the building. And so they just had this almost academic-like community to work from. And so it's almost like bringing together a Google X with an MIT Media Labs or something in the academic world, which is the ability to think big, create moonshots, but collaborate and be open to corporate and government partnerships, which is the other key piece we do, which brings you to kind of the ventilator story of where we started this.
I talk a lot about sustainability in my vacation rental presentations, but I tend to focus mostly on the offense. How do we generate more bookings through a more diversified marketing portfolio that depends less on any single given lead channel and therefore makes our business more sustainable, keeps us around a little longer? But in focusing on the offense, I noticed I tend to overlook some of the equally, if not more important and arguably obvious defensive sustainability best practices. Things like protecting our revenue, protecting our guests, protecting the properties that we manage from risk. Rental Guardian delivers best-in-class travel protection, damage protection, and liability protection for over 600 managers throughout the world. And if you want to see the sustainability of the future, check out their new Master Cancel program, which allows you to offer flexible terms and conditions, but also to protect the hard-earned revenue that you have generated. This is really cool stuff. Head over to rentalguardian.com to learn more. And remember, sustainability isn't just about the offense. Sometimes it's about protecting the home front. Let's get back to the show. I don't want to at all downplay how absolutely amazing all that sounds, but I want to focus on vacation rentals. This is what we're obsessed with.
Yeah.
And let's go back to your time at Airbnb. When you first joined Airbnb, you were kind of tasked with identifying the differences between what was already an existing urban core with these leisure markets, with professional vacation rentals that were run by small businesses, that were run by families that have been in business for quite some time. These weren't just strangers staying in someone's room. This was an actual professional vacation rental business. And you were tasked with putting together the supply side of that puzzle. How does Airbnb share these properties with the mainstream traveler? How has Airbnb changed since you left, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. At the time, you're exactly right. Like I had a conversation with Brian Chesky actually right here in New York on the Upper East Side. Chip Connolly was there, and Brian, and they took me for a quick lunch at a lovely little restaurant, and essentially shared what you just shared, which is the business had grown in an incredible manner in urban city centers, big in London, big in Paris, big in New York, big in Rome, but had not seen the same level of both supply and probably as a result demand traction in these leisure destinations. People weren't using it for Tuscany or Tahoe and Aspen or for Maui. They were using it for big cities. And I'd gone through a range of interviews with the Airbnb team before I ended up sitting down with Brian. And so I came to that interview or that kind of lunch prepared to discuss why, like how had Airbnb gotten into that position. And it was a lot about all the things that you know better than I do, which is the terms and conditions that vacation rental property managers or individual hosts need are different to what people are doing in cities sharing their apartments. The technology they use for distributing their supply is different to the average person renting out a spare room. The pricing tactics they use, the length of stay management, the dynamic pricing rules, the legal agreements they need, the deposits and safety guarantees, the additional charges for turning on the hot tub or renting out the gas grill. Like there was just an incredible amount of unique characteristics to that supply community. And that supply community had existed for decades. You weren't showing up and convincing to someone to do something they'd never done before. You were convincing someone to try using you for something they had been doing for decades. And that was different. You can't set the rules when you're showing up late to the party, was kind of one of the key messages, that you have to show flexibility. And I mean, if we're being candid between two friends and whoever's listening, it was difficult in those early days. There was um, a lot of challenge around the culture and the brand that Airbnb was building, the belong anywhere, the focus on primary owners renting out their own homes versus the vacation rental industry, which had a mixture of both, but very rarely in a VR setting are you staying with the homeowner in the house, which at that time was definitely a key cornerstone and maybe is today to the Airbnb brand. And so in those early years, it was incredibly difficult. I used to occasionally use the analogy that I had to feed Brian spinach. Like I had to kind of convince them this was something worth doing, that this was important to the ecosystem. It wouldn't deteriorate the brand. It was good for their overall growth. And that wasn't always easy. I was the first person showing up to convince and grow that vertical. If you fast forward to today, I mean, it's dramatically different. It's probably one of the biggest teams there is working with vacation rental managers. I can't imagine what percentage of demand and supply it has been pre-COVID-19, but it was a significant and committed kind of strategy by now. And so I can't take credit for much of that. I helped plant a seed and I helped nurture it a bit and tried to sell why it was worth doing and the right way to do it, which was collaborating with the community, building flexible policies that mirrored what they needed, and being flexible in leisure destinations in ways that you may not be in urban destinations. And from that original seed, it does seem to have grown over the last few years into a pretty wide kind of program with market managers in various destinations around the world and a lot of effort to kind of win the hearts and minds of that supply community.
And you, over the years, have also sort of become friends with a lot of vacation rental professionals. Is there any big thing for those who are not in the community? Perhaps you're meeting with somebody who has never heard of professional vacation rentals before. Is there any big thing about our character or personality or tendencies that you learned that you share?
Yeah, I mean, you go to the events I typically went to and occasionally show up to as well. And it's just real people, right? Like they're professional in their businesses, but the average size of them is typically on the small to medium side. So that these are like humble, genuine people fighting hard in a business that is not some lucrative like software play where your app makes 70% margin. this is a difficult business, and like every cent and every dollar counts, every percentage of margin counts. Um, and these people are committed to that industry despite the challenges that that presents on a daily basis. It is not easy. Running small businesses is never easy, and a vacation rental business is certainly no exception to that. And so you became part of this community of people who were loyal and social and love to get together and celebrate wins and like to support each other. You would meet four different PMs in a different market in kind of the Oregon coast, and they would all know each other and help each other and give a heads up about a problematic customer or a demand date that was surging that they should consider increasing pricing. It wasn't like the hotel field in that kind of competitive sense. They were just good people. I loved it. I really did enjoy being around them and the events and the conferences. They yeah, they just reminded you that like there's a lot more than revenue growth. There's a lot more to this than big numbers and growing big valuations. That there are people out there striving every day to build their own little brands in their own little parts of the country, and doing so in a very or legitimate and honest way.
So that's actually a perfect segue into where I wanted to go next. And it has to do with the role of entrepreneurship and this kind of small business, specifically in hospitality, in this new world that we are facing right now. So you have spent the last decades of your life in big businesses that change the world, in amazing ways. You're around acquisitions and millions of dollars of investments and technology that's really just world changing. Um, a lot of those kinds of startups tend to fail on paper, and the ones that do succeed are considered to be outrageously unique and lucrative. But then we look at our colleagues here as small businesses, entrepreneurs really, that have an unusually high rate of success. I mean, the longevity of these businesses, it's not a sexy business at all. It's not easy. Nothing happens overnight. But do you think there's something about this put your head down and build a profit minded business slowly in this new world where so much is changing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the right word for it is. That there's a certain amount of risk that a lot of entrepreneurs are willing to take on to build very large companies, right? You see these trends of if you're going to build an Instagram or an Airbnb, you go through years of significant losses. Like you have to be comfortable taking on financial risk
Mm-hmm.
and expecting to build a very large, unprofitable enterprise that eventually will turn that corner. That you have to have that confidence that we're built this Instagram app for people to load photos, and we don't charge for it and we don't make a cent today, but one day we will.
Like a crazy kind of faith. Yeah.
Right. You have to have a suspension of belief, I guess, or you have to somehow be willing to convince yourself that there is a silver lining at the end, or a corner you'll turn, or a light at the end of the tunnel, whatever the right metaphor is. And in exchange for that, you're willing to take on a substantial amount of risk to the business, often a substantial amount of personal risk. And for every one that succeeds at that path, that gets to that pot of gold through that level of ambition and risk, there's 99 that fail. And I think what you see differently in a lot of these vacational businesses, and don't get me wrong, some of them grow to be 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 properties. And so they do grow to be significant scale and size and levels of success. But a lot of them do it in a far more organic and slower moving and less risky version. They don't
Mm-hmm.
take on more debt than they can afford. They don't take on more properties than they can occupy. They usually kind of grow organically. And there are exceptions, don't get me wrong, and every generalization has a fault point. But the majority of them, I think, grow a business in the more traditional sense, which is like you open a restaurant, you can then open a second one or a third one, but not many people open the first restaurant and say, I'm going to take out a loan and open 1,000 in the next year. And so you see that different type of aggression and expectation of growth and valuation milestones in some of these entrepreneurial industries than what you see from the vacation rental folks.
And as the economy and a lot of the terms that we used to play by have at least temporarily been down, at least to me, it seems like a less risky, to use that phrase, kind of future that is in your control. It does require a lot of work. You're certainly not going to get rich, but it also gives you a chance to kind of design a lifestyle that you enjoy, to live somewhere that you have always loved to vacation, to interact with people. You have to be a people person to be able to excel in hospitality. Um, when we continue with this duality of like small versus big business, a lot of the big business headlines that I read and development of startups that really take off is this idea of like breaking things, moving fast and breaking things. And
Yeah.
I'm guessing you don't love that phrase breaking, but more specifically, how would you recommend, because there is something positive that statement is maybe trying to say, how do you recommend short-term rental professionals handle this kind of breaking the rules? Is there a way to navigate and run fast, and maybe it does require breaking some rules, but also to do it responsibly? Like, what's the best balance there for a small business?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and an interesting point. Yeah, the move fast and break things, and that combined with kind of the tech bro culture that has been linked to that has not worked out to be kind of something people believe is the right way to run a business today. That term of like disruption used to be kind of appealing, and now you look at Facebook's mantra of move fast and break things, and it may have broken Western democracy.
Yeah.
Like the town hall where people used to have kind of conversation around politics and government now exists on a Facebook channel that can be swayed and altered and manipulated through government bodies all the way through propaganda vehicles. And so I don't think people resonate with that as well anymore, because what exactly are you planning on breaking? And why do you have the right to kind of take that kind of reckless approach to any industry or any society? I actually I can bring it back a little bit to Newlab, which is we have about 11 or 12 different essential businesses that want to come back to Newlab. They're deemed essential by the state because they make metal devices, or they're developing technology that's relevant and important to society continuing to operate. And yet we want to bring them back in a responsible manner post COVID-19. And so we've had to develop a pretty rigorous approach to bringing these people back to the community. You're taking temperatures when you get to the building. You're going to wear a sensor in your pocket that will vibrate if you get within 6 feet of someone to maintain social distancing.
Oh, wow. I'd like to use that for my family here.
Yeah, for Thanksgiving. But it also assists with kind of historical contact tracing, that if Matt gets sick tonight, I can go look at who Matt came in contact with in the last 5 days and isolate them as well. And so the way you've done it is to test things, access new technology, start small and test it in a certain environment that's containable, where the impact can't be massive and you're not going to destroy anything. And that balance of these are things we should test and iterate on and explore, with a mindset of being cautious and being kind of cognizant of the consequences of acting too quickly or being too reckless. And so I think in any business, that's probably the answer, which is you have to look for opportunity to innovate. But I do also believe that you have to do so in a kind of more patient and organized manner that allows for step-by-step improvement versus just move quickly and break things.
And so how do you then deal with politicians who are so restricting, that are trying to shut down this kind of innovation?
I mean, it's difficult. It's very difficult. I think there's organizations that have been created around kind of speaking for the vacation rental industry. And I think you have to organize as a group to do it in a way that society has developed those channels of protest and communication, right? Like, I don't necessarily think the Uber approach of let's just operate in every city in the world and who cares if it's legal. I don't know if that's the best thing for an industry like the vacation rentals to do. I'm not sure it's the best thing for a small business to do. I think you have to find power in this community that we just praise so much. These people who fight for each other, they need to come together, have leadership that organizes them, and push for change in an appropriate manner in these communities. And I think a lot of the times you have seen examples where that has been effective, versus the like bite the thumb approach of we're just going to operate and who cares. doesn't always work out. There's certainly examples where it has, but the knee-jerk reaction can often be worse than kind of the more partnership-focused approach. And that is like Airbnb gets a lot of slack around a lot of areas, and I'm certainly not here to defend Airbnb. But during my time at Airbnb, that experience watching Uber in the public policy fights that they were having versus Airbnb's approach of trying to negotiate and create regulation and tax collection policies, like that to me is an example of it wasn't move fast and break things. It was fight hard to build community and show up at meetings with the officials on the other side of the table and discuss the problems and explain the challenges and try to get to amicable solutions. And I certainly respected that approach more than what I was seeing in the task space at the time.
One more shout out, because technology, it is your amigo. Point Central reduces hassle and improves income through smart property automation. This is the quintessential vacation rental technology of the future. Connected door locks means you're not handing over keys, much less replacing them in the middle of the night. You get notifications when cleaning teams and maintenance men and women go in and out of your properties. You can control utility bills by scheduling set points so your guests won't be able to drastically raise or lower the temperature like Stewart often does, much less when the property is vacant. People like Stewart, they'll leave the temperature on blast, they'll waste electricity.
Not everyone has a lizard-like fascination with heat, Matt.
Okay, I was just using you as an example. Prevent costly maintenance projects through real-time alerts, water leak detectors, humidity limits, HVAC analytics, which gives you a heads up if your HVAC is on the fritz. Visit pointcentral.com/VRMB to learn more. This is smart property automation. That means you don't have to deal with dumb people like Stewart. I love tips that once you flip them on, they almost automatically improve your results. You know what's another good example of that, Stewie?
Breezeway.
How did you know? Maybe it's because we just spent the last 20 minutes trying to record this thing. Breezeway's property care and operations platform solves the challenge of ensuring clean properties in the wake of COVID-19. You may be thinking to yourself, is it a Roomba? Is it a robot that goes through and cleans vacation rental properties? Of course it's not. Your housekeepers are forever your greatest asset. Instead, Breezeway is a technology that automates your operations and gives you confidence that every property is ready for the next stay. It's one of those tools that improves communication and automation, allowing your human side to soar. Breezeway was created by the founder of Flipkey, and it's helping over 400 vacation rental managers transform the way they care for properties and best respond to this annoying pandemic that we will all persevere through. Visit breezeway.io to learn more. Let's get back to the show. Let's move into professionally managed vacation rentals, which I and a lot of my colleagues like to think is almost taking a new spotlight in this new travel landscape, a standalone home with its own entrance without having to touch elevator buttons and interact with other hotel guests, with a kitchen that you don't necessarily need to go and eat out at a restaurant. You can get takeout, you can cook. With professionally managed vacation rentals done well, clean, safe, as frontier technology, would you permit me, at least for the sake of this podcast, to deem our industry frontier tech for the moment?
You bet. You go for it.
Okay, thank you. So as frontier tech, you've had experience introducing or trying to introduce technology to the mainstream public that they had never seen before. The self-driving cars come to mind. What is the best way for us as a professional vacation rental community to introduce this product that, in all fairness, is going to be new to the vast majority of the traveling public? What's the tip or guidance there?
Yeah, I mean, I think your first kind of entry point was a very valid one. The vacation rental segment has a lot of valuable components in its corner when it comes to recovering from COVID-19. All of the pieces you just mentioned, like a contained vacation environment is one that is certainly going to kind of increase in the value proposition and interest of travelers as we come out of this. And I think that's in their corner. And so, but then you have the weakness of a Marriott will promote a program of this is how we disinfect every room, this is how we clean them, this is the technology we use. They'll be able to come out with some brand standard. This is like Marriott Crystal Clean
Across the board, right?
and it'll have a stamp on it. And so that will start to give people confidence across hotel rooms in large swaths of supply, right? Suddenly you're like, oh, every Marriott hotel I'm okay with because they're doing this. The vacation rental industry doesn't necessarily have that same vehicle, right? It doesn't have that same ability to move as an organized group. It can. You have groups like Rent Responsibly, I think like that organization are obviously trying to convene people and bring people together. You have someone like yourself trying to move a single message and move the industry together.
And I'll give a shout out to VRMA. They came out with Safe Home, which is our attempt at a stamp. So give them a little shout out too.
Totally. That's right. I think they are our best shot at building a consistent message, right? You watch advertisements that are by certain industries, drink milk, like the milk mustache commercials, or the fact that we all had bacon and eggs for breakfast. That was an industry driven push. It wasn't one baking company. That was that they pushed to build campaigns to add bacon as a breakfast item. And
I would have loved to be in that boardroom meeting.
There's a lot of great things you can read about why we all eat bacon and eggs. But I think that's the example of how do you educate people about why this is now the better choice. And usually have two different pieces, right? Self-driving cars, bizarrely, are a good comparison, which is the best way to convince someone of a self-driving car's value was to get them in it. If you got them to ride in it, it was amazing. People immediately understood. Oh my God, I can drive home. I can have a beer. I can watch the soccer. I can chat with my mother on Google Hangouts. I can order food or shopping online all while this car drives me across my 45-minute commute. Like that was your easiest. And the vacation rental world probably has that, which is the best way to convince someone about vacation rentals is to get them in one. Like we used to do family vacations. My family's in Australia, my family's in London and in Toronto and here in New York. And so we would pick destinations and go travel together. And we typically, when we were young, always did resorts. Went to the Wyndham in Montego Bay and those type of resorts. And then one year, my brother organized it and rented a big house. It was in Costa Rica. And from that experience, we never went back. Every Christmas vacation for my family is a big home somewhere that we all meet at. And so that's your one pivot, is how do you get them into it? But that's obviously not an answer for everything because you can't get everyone into a self-driving car. So what we then did at Waymo, as an example, is we built a virtual reality experience that you could, with just a cell phone and a cardboard box that we provided, you could actually see from a 360 perspective what it's like to sit in a self-driving car. You could have the technology explained. You could see what the vehicle sees and why it sees it. You could show data on why it's safe and how it reacts to decisions. And that wasn't as good as getting them in the car, but it was as close as you could get to convincing them without getting them in the car. And so the VR industry, like, what is that to me? If I'm thinking, we could stay at a house, we'd have our own kitchen and our own entry. And then my husband or wife says, yeah, but there's been a family there 2 days ago. How do you know it's clean? Or some of these vacation rentals probably haven't cleaned those dishes in a decade, or this, that, or the other. And so what is the counter to that? How do you educate as a unified group that the policies, the directions, the cleaning processes, how do you give greater confidence in those capabilities of the ecosystem? And the more you do that, I think the more you win the customer.
And I think also maybe thinking of this moment, because the majority of the traveling public has not stayed in a well-done vacation rental just yet, maybe viewing that first stay as a bit of a loss leader. And I think back to your wonderful example of the self-driving cars is great, but I think way back to like elevators. If I was presented with the innovation of an elevator and told to get in there, a metal box, and it was going to fling me up many stories, I don't think I would have done it. But if you had gotten me into it, I would become the biggest evangelist of elevators. Something tells me if we're willing to eat a little bit of the profit on that first stay, we have the potential, especially now in this pivotal time, to really form relationships with these guests so that not only will they continue to come back staying with us year after year, but we have kind of turned them on to this new way of travel, and that they will think of us anytime that they choose to go and stay in a vacation rental elsewhere. I think early on I heard you say that in Airbnb, you guys were noticing that the first time people stayed in an Airbnb just became the first of many to come, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton of examples of that type of thing happening. Like you can download the Peloton app right now and get 90 days of free classes, everything from meditation to yoga, running on your treadmill, whatever you've got the capabilities to do. You don't even need to buy their hardware, but you can imagine the gateway drug that is. That after 90 days of all of this, hopefully some of us are returning to work, but will you still be addicted to your Peloton class that you've been doing on your iPad? And I think that's exactly right. Is if you can accurately assess who has never experienced one and target them with price point incentives or whatever the value proposition is to get them in there for the first time, you are converting, I think, someone for a lifetime. Airbnb, I think, is a great example. Like when I joined Airbnb and I told my parents what I was working with, they're like, "You're sleeping in other people's homes? That's ludicrous." And the first time I booked them on one and had them go on a trip in an Airbnb was to Jakarta, I believe, in Indonesia, and they never look back. Every trip they take now, they first look at Airbnb before deciding on a hotel. But that first trip, that first experience, I mean, do you remember your first Uber ride? You're like, I'm just getting in this Camry that's pulling
Right,
up.
right.
That's it.
Yeah, and then I was like, wait a minute, you're not the Uber? Sorry, dude. Um,
Yeah, that's right.
um, when I want to get a little bit back to this topic of short-term rental professionals being super passionate and being really good at what they do and not looking for anything extraordinary, looking to run a good business to make a good profit. Can you talk to me in your current setting about the power of passion or not needing an immediate short-term return? Perhaps there's a company in Newlab that's not one that you would like recommend people invest in because there's no money coming back anytime soon, yet is critically important to the future and is important to have in the community there?
Yeah, I mean, we deal with that a lot because so a lot of the comparison models of what we do, building these communities and helping entrepreneurs build companies, usually are driven by equity, right? That they get a piece of the company in exchange for you being there. They take 10% of your company in exchange for you being part of the 18-week program or the 12-week program. And we very much avoided that. And one of the reasons was because we thought, let's focus on the talent and the ambition of what they're building. And if we're not taking equity, then we're less focused on the commercial viability of it. We have people that are 3D printing rocket engines for launching cube satellites, which are the size of like a big one is the box of cereal. A small CubeSat can be the size of like a Rubik's Cube. Their first rocket
Oh my
is
gosh.
going to be launched in 2030.
Whoa.
We have people growing leather from plant collagen, like vegan leather that's grown from kind of skin cells. So you have all of these examples of companies that have significant timelines for rollout, significant risks to the product they're deploying, but the impact of it is worth the risk, and the talent and the technology involved is someone that we welcome in our community and want to have them around. And so I think there's certainly a lot of what we deal with is frontier tech moonshots. Like you can imagine in 1999, the concept of saying we're going to invest in a self-driving car project, like you would have got laughed out of many rooms. If you look at today, Google, I mean, Larry and Sergey's view to start that in 1999 was incredibly well focused. Like that was a prediction of
Mm-hmm.
where things would go that is now kind of the focus of every car maker out there is how do they keep up with the autonomous movement. So I think there is room for that ambition. I think the ambition in the VR space, honestly, is going to be around the sanitation and cleanliness of spaces. And that's where technology and these big bets around computer vision, you can actually use some of this technology to assist in convincing consumers of the cleanliness of a property.
Like what would be an example?
Well, first, like you look at how is the property clean, what is used for it. Could you set up sensors in a home that assess how clean the property is and how recently it was cleaned? Is there a third party that would validate when the last guest was in the property? You could have sensors and temperature readings and things that actually check guests so that they don't arrive sick, they don't stay in your properties. I mean, there's a lot of interesting exploration here that if you got a lot of vacation rental people in the room and partnered them with customers and then brought technologists to the table and said, this is what the customers are saying they're worried about. This is what the vacation rental manager needs to do on a daily basis and why this business is hard. Then you bring technologists who have never seen either of these people before. They've never been in a vacation rental industry and they've never talked to this customer. That fresh lens of perspective is often where the most interesting ideas come out, that someone comes up with, well, you could use this technology to confirm this or that.
Right.
But you or I would never have come up with it because we've been sitting in the space for too long, and we get kind of used to the shade of the windows, if that makes sense.
Yeah, my grandfather always used to say, to the worm in the horseradish, the world is horseradish. Which is to say, once we are inside of our little worlds here, we tend to lose any sight of anything else, and bringing new people in can be very valuable. And on that point, one of the things Newlab does so well is provide the companies there with resources. And in some cases, that's introductions. In other cases, it's just the juju of being in the area and feeding off of one another. Can you talk to us a little bit about the role of having a team, having teammates, specifically for a small business like a vacation rental? Because a lot of folks are very, very capable and enthusiastic, but they clearly can't build their property management company themselves. How do they find or align themselves with team to work?
Yeah, that's a great piece. And the one thing I wanted to add, just for the previous question that I just also like, one of the calls I just got off of was a company that focuses on timeshares. And their question was like, how the heck are we going to convince people of the safety of one destination versus another? They weren't talking about the property itself, like the cleanliness of the property, but what about the destination? What if I'm worried about getting sick and going to a hospital? I got to go to Cancun, or I have to go to Boise, or I have to go to
Right.
I have to go to Austin. Is it as safe in Austin if I came down with COVID-19 or I became ill? And we then connected them. There's a great company you guys can look up called Applied Excel, and they're a Newlab company that built a health dashboard that's been used nationwide that has a county preparedness score, and it tells you
Cool.
how many ICU beds exist in every county, how many ventilators, and it scores counties on how strong they are right now in regards to reacting to increases of COVID-19 cases. And on top of that, they have the data of how many deaths per day, how many new cases per day, how many positive and negative tests per day. And so we connected the two. The Applied Excel people have nothing to do with the travel space. None of this technology was built for vacation rentals or timeshares.
Right.
And we connected them to the timeshare company. And so now what they're going to do is, on every page where you look at a property, a timeshare, it's going to have a preparedness score for COVID-19. It's going to have the current trend rates in regards to new cases, so that a user looking at a vacation rental in Boca or in Fort Lauderdale can actually say, you know what, it's just as safe to be in Fort Lauderdale as it is to be in my home in Seattle. The county preparedness is just as good.
Wow.
There's just as many hospital beds. And so it's that type of innovation where you bring technologists and a problem together that can often come out with some really interesting solutions. But that wasn't your question.
Beautiful. I know people would not have thought of that. Yes, but I'm really glad that you added it. The question was about
Teams, yeah.
having different team members. Yeah. Is there any way, if you don't have access to an amazing Newlab set of resources, is there any advice you like to give people to surround themselves with good teammates?
Yeah, I think I use a pretty awful cheesy metaphor of like the Avengers, which is I often do this with founders that are building a board for the first time. They're like, I want to build a board of advisors to help guide my small business and to help give me advice. And they usually come to me with 5 or 6 people that all look like them. They're like, these are 5 or 6 cool entrepreneurs who are building a company, or 5 or 6 other property managers who have built successful property management companies. And my response is always, if you were building the Avengers, you wouldn't want 5 Superman or 5 Spider-Man or 5 Batman. I can't even remember who's in the Avengers. Iron Man. You want one of each, right? You need each of their skill sets. And so it's the same for a board as it is for a team, or for the advice ecosystem you create. Is who do you go to when you have questions about finance and the profitability of the business or your P&L? That's a different person than who do you go to regards real estate decisions or buying property in a certain market. Who do you go to about the design layout of your vacation rentals or your customer service? That's probably a different person than the finance person as well. So I try to like surround myself with, okay, what are the areas we need to be good at for our company? Here are the 6 flavors of expertise I need. Now, do I have them on my team? Can I afford to have them on my team? Can I get them as advisors through my network? Can I have them on my board? But really looking at like, how are my Avengers stacking up? Are there too many Spider-Men or not? Or do we have one of each and enough kind of diversity in the people who guide me on a daily basis? Because the expectation that a single property manager running a business should know everything about everything is ludicrous. Like, I don't.
It is.
You have to go. I get stuck with a question on, regulatory policy. I call friends in my network or advisors on my board who have expertise in that subject. I don't just rely on like my insight and my conclusion.
And for this moment in time, now is your reset opportunity, folks. Now is the chance to really begin thinking about where your business is going in the future and who can you get in that room to help you get there. Shaun, I know that you have a phone call in a minute or two, so I'm going to let you go. I think that's a perfect place to leave. I'm guessing you're probably about to announce the invention of like a cloud that makes Skittles or something. Very relevant to the pandemic. But Shaun, it's been quite a pleasure to watch your professional journey and to work together over the years.
It's great to speak to you, Matt. I'll speak to you soon.
I hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as I did having it. The episode was produced by Tammy Rowe and Stuart Hooper of Mango Fish Studios. Our intro song is The Moon of Pajang by Instant Party. And if you feel inspired, please consider sharing to social media with your big takeaway. We love takeaways. They make us feel great. Lastly, if you want to receive updates, you can do so at vrmb.com/MMM. And if you want to join our virtual community of vacation rental professionals, become a member of VRMB's Inner Circle today. Until next time.